Welcome to RSE for Grown-Ups. Come along with us as we walk you through the Relationships and Sex Education curriculum, otherwise known as RSE. We will be breaking the current curriculum down into manageable key stage chunks and topics.
This podcast is for parents, caregivers, or anyone in a supportive role with a young person. We will help you feel equipped for the highs and lows of growing up. If you're already listening, then it shows you are committed to supporting the important young people in your life. I'm Kelsie.
And I'm Sophie, and we are outreach workers at Luton Sexual Health. This podcast was funded by Public Health in Luton. Hi everyone, and welcome back to RSE for Grown-Ups. Today we are discussing Key Stage 4 curriculum, and we are doing the same as Key Stage 3. We're breaking it down into 2 episodes because there is so much to cover, particularly with this group of young people. So we're talking about 14 to 16-year-olds, and this is part 1. So make sure you come back for part 2.
Yeah, so it's a lot, isn't it? The Key Stage 4 curriculum is for year 10 and year 11. So realistically, when we think of young people and their sexual development and they're growing up, I guess this is the age where they're starting to think about sex and relationships a hell of a lot more. They're maybe starting to have sex and relationships, or even if they're not having sex, they might be thinking about it. There might be some sort of intimate touching, kissing, a bit more going on than there might be in the other age groups.
Yeah.
So that's worth bearing in mind. How we're going to do this today is that we're going to start by talking about some of the healthy relationships elements that young people need to know about. We're going to talk about consent and how that impacts them with some kind of examples of what's going on for young people in the communities and things like that at the moment.
Yeah. What I thought would be fun is if we started today with a little bit of a trend that's going on the socials at the moment, which is if you could meet your 15-year-old self for a coffee, what would happen? What would you say to them? What would they be saying? What would they be wearing?
Yeah.
And I thought we'd start there. So a bit like last time, get back into the zone of what it was like for us as a 15, 16-year-old. So Kelsie, what would you say to your 15-year-old self if you met them for coffee?
So if I went and met my 15-year-old self for a coffee, I'd be having a coffee, but they'd be having a can of Coke. That is one thing that's for sure. They wouldn't be drinking coffee. My 15-year-old self would definitely be wearing jodhpurs and riding boots and a sweatshirt, because all I was interested in was being out of the house, going horse riding, things like that. And what would I say to my 15-year-old self? I think I would start by telling my 15-year-old self not to be hard on themselves, that you're doing a really good job and that you're trying your best. And don't be so hard on yourself for everything that you do. I would probably tell my 15-year-old self that honestly, your family have got your best interests at heart. So I definitely, when I was 15, thought that my parents put a lot of pressure on me. I needed to do well. I needed to go to university. I needed to achieve certain things. And I think I would tell my 15-year-old self that I didn't understand that at the time. But now as an adult, I want the same things for my children. I want them to do well. And maybe I didn't understand why it was so important to my family. So coming from a family that had emigrated from Ireland and come to live here, to have opportunities, why it mattered so much to them for those opportunities. And then when it came to relationships, I think I'd tell my 15-year-old self that you don't have to say yes to anyone that wants you to do anything. It's up to you what you feel comfortable with. It's up to you what you want to do. And you're not responsible for other people's feelings.
Oh, God, it makes me emotional.
I know. As I was saying that, I was like, oh my God, I could go on. There's so much really.
Yeah.
Being 15 is hard, isn't it?
Yeah, really hard. I think if I was to meet my 15-year-old self, I would have a coffee and I'd have an almond croissant and I might have a smoothie as well. But my 15-year-old self probably wouldn't get anything because they were like so conscious in their body.
Yeah. Very
conscious about what to eat. And I think looking back now, I would never say I had an eating disorder, but there was definitely disordered eating because I just wanted to be a stick and I wanted to be thin and I wanted to look a certain way. And I think I just limited having fun and enjoying food for what it was. So I probably don't think she would have eaten anything, which makes me sad. And she would probably be in like her, like, I don't know, a dance wear or something that she could move in because she did lots of dancing after school or at school. And I think I would probably say, I think in terms of relationships, I think I would say, because I was about to have my first ever relationship at 15, really fancied someone. It would later turn into, you know, a long-term relationship, my first ever relationship. And I think I would just say to her to trust her guts and her instincts, and also give her some little warning signs that maybe things aren't as good as they seem.
Yeah.
Like just some little tips for what a healthy relationship really looks like checking partners' phones is not part of a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Probably means there's not a lot of trust or a lot of respect. Just give her some of the tools that nobody ever spoke to her about. And that felt like a really normal, just part of a relationship, that there was lots of trust issues. And just in general, I think I would say a lot of the same stuff, like you're doing a great job. Don't be so hard on yourself. Yeah. Things will get better. And also, like, just because the life doesn't take you down the path that you think it's going to, doesn't mean that you're a failure. Like, yeah, it doesn't mean that you've failed or that you haven't made your dreams come true or whatever that is. Like, you've just gone down a different route, and actually you're really, really happy where you are right now at 31. So
that's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty cool.
I was thinking as well about my 15-year-old self, and kind of, I don't know whether it's like a repressed element or something that when we were talking about this, I didn't really consider. But my 15-year-old self had very strong feelings for a girl who was my friend. And obviously now, I've mentioned before, I'm married to a woman. I've had relationships with men as well. But yeah, so I'd probably tell my 15-year-old self that was okay and that was normal. And I think, as someone who was very aware of the fact that they were attracted to men and women growing up, I kind of assumed that it's okay. You might have feelings for somebody and like mess around with somebody and everything else. But that isn't, you don't have to be in a straight presenting relationship to be valid and for it to be like relevant, and your relationships still matter kind of wherever they relate to sexuality and stuff like that. Because that was, I guess, a big thing for me that wasn't a big thing. Yeah. It was just a very quiet thing when I was 15.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And what would you say anything to your 15-year-old self? Because I sort of mentioned about having a healthy relationship. Was there anything as your 15-year-old self that you would have told them to spot any signs that somebody wasn't quite, I don't know, the right person, or things weren't going as, because this is a big topic for this age group. It is looking definitely out for those signs.
So I would say that for me, it wasn't so much about spotting unhealthy relationships, but like being comfortable with the fact that you don't need to be in a relationship. For me, it was like, I'm so valid if someone loves me and give me attention and wants to like be my partner. And actually, I have been with my current partner since I was very young, and not really ever spent that much time by myself or having that really loving relationship with myself. So I think that would be the key point, that you don't need to be in a relationship to be seen or to be valid. And you can explore loving yourself and explore like who you are as a person.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And we hear that quite a lot, I think, from this age group. If we go into schools or we're doing one-to-one work, I'm working with someone at the moment who's around this age, and it's like, what if I never find love? Or what if nobody ever likes me for who I am? Or maybe I need to look a certain way for people to start fancying me. I think this age, you're becoming super conscious of yourself as a potential romantic partner. Like, it's definitely a shift from some of the conversations we've had before about wanting to fit in and wanting to find friends. Now you're like looking for love, like you're looking for a connection.
Yeah, and also you're looking for a connection in quite a serious way. Yeah. So when you're like, when an adult or a parent or a professional, whoever we're talking about, a grown up, says to you like, well, this is just young love. You're going to get burned. It's not going to be forever. You're like, you don't understand me. You don't understand my feelings or how deeply in love I am. So it's actually a really like hard time when you feel like other people don't validate your experience in the same way as you're feeling it.
Yeah. And I think at this age, I spent like much more time in my room, much more time listening to sad songs, like thinking about how, you know, nobody cares for me and nobody loves me. And I think that causes a lot of like not friction at home necessarily, but we had a conversation before we started recording about how, and you said it to, you know, when you were talking about your 15-year-old self, like your parents do have your best interest, but I feel like at that age, there's a little bit of like a wall suddenly comes up between parents and their children, because there's so much more independence for the child. They're starting to look for things that really matter and mean something to them. They may start spending more time with a partner, or they may start going out more and spending more time with friends looking for a partner, or whatever it is. And it's just,
they get the opportunity to kind of make their first significant life choices.
Yeah.
So we are opened up to a world of like, well, you're adults, so you need to decide whether you're going to go to college or university, or what your thoughts are around that and where you're going with that. But you need to do as I say.
Yeah.
There feels like a little bit of a disconnect between, sometimes we're like, oh, we trust you. We want you to make your own decisions. We want to empower you to be adults. And also we want to tell you what to do. Yeah. So it is about striking that fine balance. So when it comes to teaching the national curriculum around RSE for this age group, where do we start? Where do we start with year 10 and 11s?
Oh, so many things. I think really importantly, when we go into schools and when we talk to year 10 and 11s, we always start again with consent, recapping the law, recapping signs of consent, how to give consent but more importantly, in the context of sex. Like we're very just straight down the line. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about sexual consent now, what you can and can't do. And how to navigate that if you are in a relationship, or how to navigate that when you're at a party, or how to navigate that if a friend pushes a boundary, like.
Yeah, or like other kind of experiences that are indicative of being a teenager. Like how do you navigate consent when you first start drinking, when you first start, I don't know, maybe exploring with drugs or getting high or whatever else. Because that's also a really important part of it. And like you said, when you are teaching year 7, 8 and 9 RSE, you might come from a place of like consent as a whole, like how are we kind to our friends? How do we ask people what they want to do? But like when you get into year 11 and year 10, it is straight up about that sexual consent. And the fact that we're quite often talking to young people about like verbal and non-verbal signs of giving consent. And I think that's something that young people really struggle with.
Yeah, because we talk a lot about the enthusiastic yes, don't we? Yes. But we also are saying to them, and I think we said this in the previous episode, but it's not necessarily about a communication that needs to happen before having sex. It's like, that could be happening over text message to like agreeing, and then a check-in before. It's reciprocating body language and touch. It's not always like a question and an answer. And I think that's really important for young people to know, because I feel like they feel like consent is quite, by the time I sometimes go in and teach year 10 and 11, they're like, yeah, I know what consent is, miss. Like, I don't want to learn any more about it. And now I have to ask for permission. But I'm like, but are you going to do that when you're in the middle of sex? Like, how are you going to do that then in the middle of sex? And they're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
That feels really awkward and icky. I'm like, exactly. That's why we need to re-have this conversation.
In the context of actually talking about sex.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we did recently was like find some different kiss scenes from Love Island.
Yeah.
Because a lot of that age group, the 10s and 11s, will have watched Love Island and will be familiar with that. And we talked about kisses where it was really obvious that both people were leaning in at the same time and they were making eye contact and they were touching prior to kisses. And then there's also kisses on there that are a bit icky, where people are like leaning back or they're moving away, like
not making eye contact, hands over mouths. Like we do lots of stuff, don't we, about body language with this age group. Because they do still and they're still even if some of them are having sex or are sexually active, they're still finding talking about it really difficult and really like, oh, this is even more icky because I'm actually having it and now I feel majorly embarrassed and don't want to.
And I think that they fear that if they engage too willingly in the conversation about sex, that it might appear like they are having it when they're not.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so consent, really important. Healthy relationships is a big one, and they will be, again, it's moving on from thinking about what having a healthy, positive friendship looks like and how to navigate sort of falling out in arguments with how to navigate if somebody is abusive or really unhealthy behavior. So can we think of, let's just brainstorm quickly some positive, healthy attributes of a relationship, and then we'll talk about some of the negative ones.
Okay, so I think that sometimes with young people, we see that they have, in terms of positive relationships, they understand making time for each other.
Yeah.
And they have quite a good concept now, maybe more so than potentially when I was younger, of dividing your time between your friends and your partner.
Yeah.
And they, both boys and girls, seem to have a really good concept of, I want to spend time with someone that I care about, but I also want them to see their friends, have good connections, things like that. For us, that's a really good sign of a healthy relationship, being able to strike a balance. For me, another really good sign of a healthy relationship is when young people come to the clinic together.
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
So when they're thinking about sex and they haven't even had it yet, and then they come to the clinic and they're like, hey, we're going to have sex, but we've got some questions and we want to think about contraception and we want to make sure we've got condoms. It's like, yes.
Yeah. You're our favourite.
Yeah, you're doing it. Fabulous.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
We get it.
Yeah.
So for me, that is a really good sign of a healthy relationship. And people that are, it's quite rare really to meet young people who are like, I've got a boyfriend, I've got a girlfriend, who seem to be able to kind of label their relationship and express some kind of commitment to each other. Because for me, one of the issues that I find around unhealthy relationships is that young people don't perceive themselves to be in a relationship with the person. So
situationship.
Yeah, it's a situationship. We're just seeing each other. They're not my boyfriend, they're not my girlfriend. It's like, that's cool. But when we're talking about relationship, we're talking about the connection between two people.
Yeah. And often with that, there comes loads of blurred lines with like boundaries. And we'll get young people come into the clinic and like, well, I'm in a situationship. They're not really my boyfriend, but they're sleeping with other people. So now I need to get STI tested. And we're like,
and I'm not comfortable with it. Yeah.
Like, wow, this is really intense and you're only 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is, it's fair to acknowledge that adults and people who are not young and experimenting with their like first sexual relationships and intimate relationships might be ethically non-monogamous. They might have explored open relationships, or they might just be seeing someone where it is just like casual sex, but both people are aware of that. They've communicated the boundaries involved in that. There's a lot more to it, and young people seem to want to shy away from. They think it's a bit cringe, I think.
To have a commitment to each
like
other.
Commit to each other seems a bit cringe. And it's like, okay, but you're supposed to be learning about relationships, and this is not necessarily how like the natural progress of things. People that meet online and they've never met in real life for a year 10 or 11, for me, that is a sign of an unhealthy relationship.
Yeah. What other things would you say like are unhealthy? I'm thinking about some of the things and the activities we do with the young people. We often talk about, I guess they're quite low level. They're sort of like, we would call them, we do a game where we do green flags and red flags, but I guess some of them are sort of like an amber flag.
Yeah,
things
we say
like,
pink flag.
Yeah, a little warning, a little.
Exactly. So if you have a pink flag and it keeps happening over and over and over again, then it might become a red flag.
A red flag, yeah.
I think I got that from La 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 Let Me Explain
cool,
on their Instagram, but it is a really good point to say that things that are just a bit ick that keep coming up might become red flags.
Yeah. So we talk a lot with young people. It's like what I said at the beginning about my 15-year-old self, like checking each other's phones or bombarding each other with messages all the time and not getting a response. Those are little things of like, well, let's question why that's happening. And normally it's like, well, there's no trust or respect or like boundaries in the relationship. I think you've mentioned before, which is a great point, if somebody is keeping that relationship a secret.
Yeah.
Now that could be for a myriad of reasons. Like, for example, if I think about an LGBT relationship, it could be that somebody hasn't had that conversation with friends and family yet, so they're not ready to explore that openly.
But however, that does then, even in LGBT plus I'm saying everything wrong now, LGBTQ plus relationship, that maybe if one person is out and the other person isn't, that can create a power imbalance in that relationship. And that can be quite scary, because then the person's in the situation where it's like, well, if you don't do what I say, then I could out you to your friends, out you to your family. And so we are really trying to get young people to identify those power imbalances themselves.
Yeah. And like, because we talk to young people and they're normally like, well, it's an age thing, a power imbalance. But like you said, a power imbalance could be anything. It could be withholding information about someone. A power imbalance could be you've got lots of their nudes. It could be, lots of different things. But we do talk a lot about, well, is it a healthy relationship if the young person is going out with someone particularly older than them that's potentially left school? And they're like, we sometimes get the response, don't we, when we talk to young people, but my parents know and it's fine. And we've had teachers say, but is it okay if the parents know? Because surely that means it's safer. And we're like, well, it might be safer, but in the relationship, there's still like at completely different stages. They're going to want different things from each other.
Yeah.
And does that put the younger person in that relationship at more risk of doing things that they're not comfortable to do and not ready to do?
Or that are not really for their age group or not appropriate for like their level of exploration. And I think that what we are encouraging is to get young people to consider why. Why does that person, like when I was 15, I went out with a 19-year-old. And now when I think about it, I think, why did you want to go out with a 15-year-old? Like you could drive, you could go to clubs, you could, why hanging out with a schoolgirl? Yeah, well, okay, that's quite maybe something that I want to encourage other young people to think about their situation. What are they getting out of it?
Yeah.
So when we talk about healthy and unhealthy relationships and our lovely red flag, green flag game, one that pulls up a lot of controversy is around buying gifts.
Oh, yeah.
And buying expensive gifts for partners. Can you explain a little bit about why we talk to young people about buying gifts?
Yeah, so we talk about buying gifts from, I guess, a point of view of getting them to think about, again, that power imbalance, somebody giving them something and then owing them something in return. And we're sort of treading the boundaries and starting to have conversations around grooming and exploitation, which we are going to have a whole episode on because that's a humongous topic, and that is Kelsey's area of expertise. She's going to talk us through all the different models of exploitation.
Absolutely.
But it's something we definitely get young people to be aware of. So in our game, we often have a piece of paper that says your partner buys you lots of expensive presents, and they go, yes, I love expensive presents, and they put it in green because they're like, oh yeah, getting presents is a sign of affection and a sign of love and a sign that somebody cares for me. And we also throw one in there that's like buying you presents that they've spent time thinking about or that they've made, or I don't know. And they're like, oh yeah, that's cute too. But then we think a little bit about if someone buys us something really expensive or they're buying it for us all the time, how does that then make us feel? Like if we can't return the favor, or if they start expecting things in return, or if we talk a lot with young people about love bombing.
I was just going to say love bombing. And
tell us what love bombing is, Kels.
So for anybody that doesn't know, love bombing is when somebody, and it is potentially can be part of grooming and exploitation, but actually really it can just be part of quite an unhealthy relationship.
And a bit of gaining some control in a relationship.
And gaining control in a relationship. It doesn't necessarily mean it's about exploitation. So love bombing is when you will shower someone with an incredible amount of love, attention, affection, gifts, really kind of fill a void in their life and make them feel really good about themselves and about their situation. And then you might withdraw that love. Okay. So that could be as punishment. It could be to make them feel like they're missing out on something, or it could be because you don't have the time and energy to provide them with that level of love once you feel like you've got what you need from them. And then what might happen is that partners could argue. There can be situations where there might be conflict, animosity, there might be cheating, I don't know. Whatever the situation it is, it can go bad in the relationship. And then as soon as it goes bad and the other partner tries to withdraw, all that love will be dumped back on him again. I'm so sorry. You're so important to me.
I'll never do it again.
Yeah, I'll never do it again. You mean the world to me. His gifts, his flowers, his diamonds, whatever. And that kind of seems to happen on a cycle. And what we know as people who have kind of in our early 30s and we've got lots of different friends and experienced lots of different relationships is that doesn't just happen to young people. That happens to people in relationships regardless. It happens to people kind of throughout their life. But we actually don't have an education opportunity around this after people leave school. So we do really want to let people know that sometimes buying you expensive gifts and them holding it back, or saying you're indebted to me, is not necessarily a good thing. Whereas something given unconditionally is genuinely more of a sign of like love. Like, hey, I don't know, I saw this flower when I was walking to meet you and I thought it would be nice and I picked it and I bought it for you. To me is much nicer than, I had to get myself in debt so that I could buy you this stuff for Valentine's Day and you don't even appreciate it.
Making someone feel bad for the presents that you've given them is
cringe.
And it is cringe. And I think this may sound, I was just thinking like this may sound really obvious, particularly if we have parents listening who may think, yeah, but surely that sounds like really, that's obviously sounds like an unhealthy behaviour.
Yeah.
But what we know is that young people are struggling more and more to identify these behaviours.
They are.
Like they're even struggling to identify that maybe someone being physical with you is a sign that this is an abusive relationship. So that's why noticing these that seem really small or may seem insignificant or may seem just like, you know, teenagers having a bit of an argument or a bit of a tiff, like they actually are much bigger. And like you said, there could be far more repercussions for the situation.
Yeah, associated with it. I think that's a really important point, and they kind of have to find their own way of navigating that. And I know we've mentioned this before, right, when we were talking about really young children, but it is important to remember that not every child has had a healthy relationship model to them in their life. They might have been brought up by a single parent who is very good at loving themselves and loving their children, but they haven't actually had the opportunity to model a healthy relationship to their child. They could be brought up with parents that don't have the most healthy relationship. And the issue with things like gift giving is that it can make things become transactional. So you give this to me and therefore I do that. And people get into patterns of behaviour because of that.
And relationships with parents can be transactional.
Absolutely.
So if the relationship with a parent or the carer, whoever's the provider at home, is transactional, then we often see, don't we, that young people then their relationships with friends and partners is also transactional, and that's a normal part of their life. And I think the sad truth is as well, we know that young people come from homes where there's lots of things like domestic violence. We meet lots of young people who have experienced that or are experiencing that. So I think another main part of this healthy relationships and consent part of the Key Stage 4 curriculum is building resilience.
100%.
And having strategies to deal with some of these behaviours and relationships and where to seek support. What do you think what are some of the messages you think young people need then at this age to help them build resilience or to help them say, hi, I actually need a little bit of help around this and I don't know what to do?
I think that this kind of starts from a place of people need to know what options are available to them and who the safe adults are in their life. And we talked about safe adults and how not every parent has to be a safe adult for every child. It could be an aunt, an uncle, a friend, a big sister, it doesn't matter. But knowing that there is someone there who can, you know, like, have you seen the things where it's like, we listen, we don't judge. So knowing that you have someone in your life that can listen and not judge is really important to make you feel like you can seek help when you need to. But actually, when we're thinking about the national curriculum, some of it is about knowing I can go to the police if I need to because I don't have to put up with this. Or there are organisations that exist specifically to support someone who is experiencing domestic violence, or there are organisations that can support if addiction is an issue in a relationship. And it's kind of about signposting and making young people aware of the services. And also, like, we as a sexual health clinic obviously are there to talk about contraception and to do STI screening. We do a lot of pregnancy testing with
we do.
I've got to say though, in 3 years of doing pregnancy testing with 15 and 16 year olds and that kind of age group, I've only actually ever had one person who was pregnant. So a lot of it is supporting them when they're kind of anxious, making sure that if they have taken risks, how do we teach them to alleviate those risks? And
I actually wonder whether some of those young people coming for a pregnancy test at the sexual health clinic is probably their first experience of the sexual health clinic.
I mean, my first experience of a sexual health clinic was, oh my God, I'm going to go and get a pregnancy test and I don't know what's going on and that kind of stuff. And then kind of, I think I might have even got my period on the way home. Like,
that's happened so many times when I'm in a room with a young person, like, I've just been to the toilet and come my period. I'm like, right, let's talk about contraception.
And actually maybe it's kind of just do they know that they can come in just for a chat, or do they feel like they need a crisis to walk through the door?
That's really true. Yeah, that's really true. Amazing. So because we're going to talk next time about contraception, STIs and sexual health, because that's a massive part of Key Stage 4. And also like what to do if we do tell a young person they're pregnant, like what are their options at that age? I thought we would finish today talking a little bit more on being online.
Yeah.
Because although we did a massive chat about it last week, again, like we said, we're ramping it up for 14, 15-year-olds. Because
it's an older age group.
It's an older age group. And this is, I think, the age that they are 100% sending nudes. That's a massive generalization, but every time we go into a school, this is the age group where they have sent nudes have been leaked, nudes have gone around school. And this is also the age group you particularly get a lot of referrals for young girls who are at major risk of exploitation. Yeah, definitely. And to be quite honest, in 2024, 2025, exploitation begins online. Yeah. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge that whether we're talking about the boyfriend model, the party model, all these things we can go into in the future, the initial interaction starts online. Yeah. And if I'm being really honest, it generally starts on Snapchat, and nudes and things sent like that, because just because a message disappears, young people think that the consequence disappears and it's all temporary. What they don't understand is that once an image has been shared, that's it. It's out there. It's in the world. And I think the thing I find really hard about the nudes and the sexting part of it is that we can give assemblies on this till we're blue in the face. Yeah? We can post social media content that's how to have your nudes removed. We can talk about not being pressured. But it is my opinion that young people think that that is flirting and that is a normal part of their stages of relationships. And that it's safer than having sex. Yeah. I feel like we've had this conversation with young people very frankly, like, guys, when we weren't having sex, we were just flirting in person and like doing lots of touching that wasn't sex and snogging in the park. Like, we didn't have phones to send, picture messages or anything like that. So we had to be, creative about how we wanted to flirt, because I think they think if they're not touching each other and they're not actually having sex and they're not in each other's bedrooms because maybe they're not allowed to be. Yeah, they don't have the opportunity. They don't have the opportunity to, that they can just send sneaky pictures back and forth to each other. But like we've said so many times, that they're just putting themselves at so much risk, and they're just, someone's going to find out. It kind of boils down to like when I was saying a lot of young people think that their first relationship is going to be the love of their life and they're going to get married and they're going to have babies together and trust this person and be together forever. And then, I don't know, they get drunk at a party and cheat on them. And then they're like, oh my God, I don't like you anymore. I'm going to release all of your nudes out into the world. And it's like, hello, that has a name. It's called revenge porn. Yeah. And it's against the law. And it's a really hard level conversation to sit down and say to your teenagers, if you are sending and receiving images, you can be charged with sending and distributing child pornography. Because 15 and 16-year-olds, especially 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds who are legally allowed to have sex, do not perceive themselves to be children. No. And when the law talks about child pornography, we are talking about images of people who are under 18. So it's really important. And I think that, I know we talked a little bit about being responsible for like giving our children phones and what we do with them. And we need to just straight up have that conversation. Definitely. Like, we need to have boundaries with our kids, and they need to know this is what the consequence could be. Especially if they're in relationships. And their first relationships. Yeah. Because that is the time where you are like, I don't really know how a relationship works, so let's just give it all a go and see what happens. It is. It's a hard one, because sexting, unsolicited images, they're kind of like normal to young people. And actually, it is our responsibility as educators or as parents or professionals to kind of lay down the law and be like, actually, it isn't that normal and it isn't allowed. And of all the things, like, cool, we can talk about harm reduction. We can say, don't put your face in a photo. Don't make sure there's school uniform in the background. School uniform on the floor. Don't have any, like, I don't know, like a necklace you always wear or tattoos or anything that are identifying marks in an image, so that you reduce your risk and harm. Yep. But actually, my true honest opinion is we need to talk to young people about not sending images at all. Yeah. Because also,
we know that like sexual predators exist, and we know that we see news reports of a person found with 100,000 indecent images of children on their computer. And that's images that young people are generating themselves. They are creating that content. And actually, the really hard thing is because it's being normalized to them to create that content, it links into sextortion, further exploitation, because images of underage people hold a higher value than images of a consenting adult. So a young person can be exploited into like providing more images for someone else's profit. And it's kind of a bit ick and a bit horrible. And it's like one of those things that like, we're just going to have to be real about this. We have to talk about this.
What I thought, because we haven't mentioned it and it's just reminded me you talking about it. We haven't spoken about it in terms of unhealthy relationships, but I thought it would be cool. We don't necessarily have a question for the end of today, but I thought we discuss some of the things that young people are bringing to our attention, or we're being asked to go in and teach because of some of these norms that young people are surrounded by, and some of the things that they think are just a normal part of either growing up, entering into a first sexual relationship, in their first relationship.
Or gender-based. It's normal for boys to be like this. It's normal for girls to be like this. Okay, so I think that we're both thinking about the same thing. And actually, in the last year, probably one of the most kind of concerning different things that we were ever asked to go and teach. And actually, this was in a college. So we are talking about 16, 17 years, but a very similar age group who wouldn't have received this education in school. We were asked if we could go in and talk to these young people about how not to hurt women if they're rejected, and how to handle the impact that might have on their confidence, their self-esteem, and the way they kind of look after themselves. And it's a really hard one, isn't it? Because that's not something I've ever been asked to teach before.
No, never. I think when we both got the email, we were really, really shocked. But that also came at a time where we were going in to do some sessions with year 10s. And we were doing the red flag, green flag, like what's healthy in a relationship. And there's cards in there about pressuring someone to have sex, or whether
you need to ask consent in a relationship.
Or whether you need to ask for consent every time you have sex if you're in that relationship. And we were actually quite disturbed by some of the views. And it was really hard to know whether the young people were sort of trying to poke the bear a little bit, see if we were going to create a reaction, or whether they genuinely think that is just like the norm. Like it's part of the process. I think one of the young people said to us, like, well, if you just keep asking them to have sex, they're going to say yes eventually. And like, that's just normal. And we were like, what? That is so... I'm getting irate. I'm knocking my microphone around.
You're going to hear it banging in there.
Like that is so not normal. And again, I feel like those conversations, because like you said, we're going blue in the face doing this in schools. And I think teachers are too. And teachers are finding it more and more difficult with these really sort of radical ideas around women and relationships and sex. These conversations have to be happening at home. We have to take responsibility for our children and have like really, like you said, sit down conversations and be really
honest about stuff. Because it isn't a woman's responsibility. And I think the thing that I would say that we are actually trying to teach girls is that it isn't their responsibility.
Well, that was the other thing.
Be aware of the guys.
Sorry, I'm getting like mad sat here, and this isn't us, but we'll get off our soapbox in a little bit.
We won't. But it's fine.
But we were doing this session with a group of lads. There was only one girl in the group, and we did a values continuum, which we often do with this age group because we really want to see what their opinions are on things. We want to be up to date. We're not young, cool. And we asked them, what did we say? Girls need to get better at saying no and communicating exactly what they want. That was the statement. And we asked you to go to one side of the room if you agree, one side if you disagree. Now, there was a bit of a split between the students, but two of the teachers in the room, a male and a female student, went to agree.
Straight. Like beelined to it. Girls need to get better. And the hard thing is that in contrast to that, you can ask the same question if boys need to get better at understanding consent or looking for signs of consent, and they'll all just say no. And we need to actually empower girls to understand that that they're not responsible for the way that boys feel. They're responsible for the way that they feel. So actually going into a school and teaching a lesson about how to handle rejection isn't really what we do.
Well, it isn't what we do. And it isn't on the RSE curriculum. No.
So learning about the difference between healthy and unhealthy, learning about how to stay safe online, learning about consent, learning about sexual boundaries, they all are. But like we know that a girl was stabbed on a bus in London by somebody that she rejected. We talked recently about a 19-year-old girl that had her face bitten off by somebody who she rejected again, and that was a much older man.
And it goes back to what you would say to your 15-year-old self, which really was very poignant for me. And I think probably everybody listening, like, you don't have to do something that you don't want to do, but often the time in these relationships, people are really frightened or worried, or they're worried about what the outcome will be if they don't. And that goes for anybody. We're not just targeting a specific group of people when we talk about this, because we also had really good conversations that day.
Definitely.
With lots of boys who had some excellent points, and but what we're saying is what we're seeing. And it is becoming more and more, and we've been doing this a long time.
We have. And I think that all we can do is we can work together. I'm going to try and be very positive, end on a very positive note. But all we can do is talk. All we can do is straight up, honestly, have conversations. We talk to young people about being active bystanders and about challenging things, and like how much of a legend it makes you to call out sexism and racism and homophobia and transphobia and whatever else it is.
And we can call out our kids as well.
And we can.
I'm sure you would call out your kids.
Oh, I would absolutely. And like my son says, I live with 3 women and we've got pictures on the walls that are about girl power and stuff like that. And he's like, oh, and I say, well, that's okay. The whole rest of the world is set up for you, baby. The whole patriarchy exists, and we can acknowledge that. We can acknowledge that we live in a patriarchal system while we have straight up honest conversations about it with our kids.
Amazing. I think that is a great point to end on.
Amazing. So join us next time when we are going to be getting into it around STIs and contraception. We're going to give you guys a condom demonstration and carry on this conversation about what our young people in year 10 and 11 are learning in RSE. Thank you.